You know that feeling, right? You're staring at two options, you've got that pit in your stomach, and you're just completely paralyzed. It's that moment where doing absolutely nothing feels so much safer than making the wrong move. But why is that? Why is the fear of a bad choice so often more powerful than the hope for a good one? Well, today we're going to unpack the psychology of indecision. Okay, let's start with a question. Just picture this. You find out your next door neighbor just won the lottery. We're talking life-changing, never work again money. Now, imagine you had the exact same winning numbers, but you decided not to buy a ticket that week. How would that feel? Pretty awful, right? This isn't just some hypothetical nightmare I made up. This is the actual advertising slogan for the Dutch postal code lottery. Yeah, you heard that right. It's a marketing campaign built not on the happy dream of winning, but on the absolute terror of watching someone else win with your numbers. So here's how this brilliant, kind of devious thing works. In this lottery, your address, your postal code, is your number. So everyone on your street is already a potential winner. The only thing you have to do is decide whether to pay to activate your ticket. This completely reframes the whole decision, doesn't it? Not playing isn't just forgetting. It becomes an active choice to miss out. And believe me, the stakes are incredibly high. The grand prize can be somewhere around $9.3 million. That is an amount of money that makes the potential pain of not playing, well, it's almost unbearable. And that very specific fear is exactly what gets people to buy a ticket. So what is this powerful feeling, this whole if only I had just bought a ticket sensation? Well, psychologists have a name for it, and it's basically the engine that drives our fear of making choices. It's called anticipated regret. And you gotta pay attention to that first word, anticipated. This isn't the regret you feel after you've messed up. No, this is the regret you predict you're going to feel in the future. It's like the ghost of a future emotion, and it's haunting your decision right now. Think about it. We are so motivated to avoid that painful if-only moment that we literally change our behavior in the present. We buy the lottery ticket. We choose the safe job. We do all these things just to protect our future selves from the sting of a bad decision. But okay, here's where things get complicated. You'd think that this fear of regret always makes us cautious, right? It just pushes us toward the safest possible bet. But that's not the whole story. There's actually a really interesting paradox at play. So yeah, does anticipating regret always lead to risk-averse behavior? I mean, the common wisdom is better safe than sorry, isn't it? Well, what's fascinating is that research shows sometimes the complete opposite is true. The one key thing that changes everything, the variable that flips the whole script, is something called feedback. And whether you expect to get it or not is what determines if you're going to play it safe or take a massive risk. So in this context, feedback just means finding out what would have happened if you'd chosen differently. With the postal code lottery, you get guaranteed feedback. If you don't play and your code wins, you will know about it. There is absolutely no escaping the outcome of the path not taken. This is a great way to see the two faces of regret. See, when you won't get feedback, when you'll never know what could have been, you tend to be risk-averse, better safe than sorry. But when you know for a fact that you will find out what you missed out on, you can actually become risk-seeking. You'd rather take a big risk than have to live with the certain knowledge of your regret. Let's look at another example of how this plays out. Imagine you're choosing between two cars, a reliable but pricey Saab, that's the safe choice, and a cheaper but less reliable Renault. You're leaning towards the Saab, but then your friend says, hey, you know what? If you don't buy that Renault, I'm gonna. Suddenly, bam, you have a guaranteed feedback loop. You're gonna see her driving it every single day. You'll know if it never breaks down. And that fear, the fear of seeing her perfectly happy with the cheaper car, can actually push you to make the riskier choice and buy the Renault yourself. Wild, right? And this isn't just a fun little thought experiment. It's backed up by actual data. In a study by Marcel Zeelenberg, when people didn't expect to get feedback on a risky consumer choice, only about 21% of them went for it. But when they were told they would find out the outcome of that risky choice anyway, that number jumped all the way to 37%. That is a huge shift, and it's driven entirely by the expectation of feedback. So this fear of regret, especially when we know we're going to get feedback, is a super powerful force. But it's actually just one piece of a much bigger psychological puzzle. So let's zoom out a little and look at our general, often unconscious preference for just doing nothing at all. All of these behaviors we have, delaying decisions, sticking with what we know, just failing to act, they all fall under this larger umbrella. It's a really deep-seated tendency we have to avoid the responsibility of making an active choice whenever we possibly can. And psychologists have actually mapped this out. This model, from research by Christopher Anderson, it shows how all these different factors, things like anticipated regret and how difficult a choice is, they all feed into our decision to just stick with the status quo or defer the choice. It's a great visual for how our final decisions are a product of both logic and our emotions, especially that drive to avoid feeling bad later on. And this brings us to the big, formal definition of decision avoidance. It's basically any behavior where your main goal is to sidestep the burden of actually having to make a call. This can mean putting it off, sticking with whatever the default option is, or just letting a good opportunity slide on by. Decision avoidance shows up in 4 main ways, and I bet you'll recognize them. First, there's the status quo bias. That's just sticking with your current phone plan because switching feels like a hassle. Then there's omission bias, where we feel like it's way worse to actively make a bad investment than to passively miss out on a good one. You've also got choice deferral. That's just putting off a decision until later. And finally, inaction inertia. That's the feeling of, well, I missed the 50% off sale, so I'm not going to buy it at 40% off, even though 40% off is still a great deal. Okay, so we know we fear regret, we get tripped up by feedback, and we have this deep, deep bias for just doing nothing. So what does this all boil down to when we're frozen in our own moments of indecision? It really comes down to 3 main forces that are all pushing you toward doing nothing. First, that powerful emotional desire to avoid future regret and any potential blame. Second, simple selection difficulty. When choices are too complicated or too similar, it's just easier to check out. And third, the real-world costs of taking action and actually making a change. So, at the end of the day, our hesitation isn't just some irrational fear. It's a really complex dance between logical cost-benefit analysis on one hand and a deeply human emotional drive to shield ourselves from the future pain of what if. And that leaves us with one final question. The next time you find yourself totally frozen, unable to choose, you'll know the psychological forces that are at play. You'll recognize that fear of feedback and that strong pull of the status quo. So now that you can name it, will you be able to choose differently?